What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show. Also, 2018 winner of the Innovation Award from the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. We like to say you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. And we actually made it on. Sorry for the delay for all those people who were waiting. We finally made it. It's like an old Barry Manilow song. It looks like we made it.
Yep.
For those who remember that song. And I have, well, not two new friends for me, but on the video side, there'll be two new friends for a whole pile of people. We have Brian and Beth, and I met them a few weeks ago across from a table. And we were doing a table talk, sort of, and we had so much fun. In regards to their subject they shared with me, and they were part of the most recent Men and Women's Summit on Masculinity that was held in Toronto. They rocked the house. Beth was her wild and crazy and fun self.
I was. It's true. I help it.
And Brian was the usual straight man, just doing his thing. Just really cool. Oh, just want to shout out to This Is Eileen on the Periscope side. Thank you so much. Hope things are well in California. And Beth would know who Eileen is.
I do. I adore Eileen. Hi. She's saving me.
So we're gonna be starting a 3-part series called Converting Religious Shame to Soulful Intimacy, a 3-part series. We're going to be starting number 1 tonight, and we'll get through some other conversations in the next few weeks. But I'd like to, as always, say welcome to the new friends, and always like to say, let the ladies go first. Can you give a little background about yourself, Miss Beth?
Sure. Hi. Nice to see you, and this is fun to try this out. I like it. Yeah, me. Well, since we're on the subject, I grew up in a loving Christian evangelical home, and so we'll talk more about that. But that is a lot about me because that was very much in me from start, probably till finish. It doesn't go anywhere. It's what I'm finding. And I, along the way, somewhere was directed to do accounting, do real estate investing. None of these things really sat well with me, but I did them for many, many years. And then I changed careers, and I now coach people around intimacy. And I especially love coaching people around intimacy that have been, as I call it, affected by religion, and really just finding pleasure without any of the attached baggage, right? So yeah, so that's what I do. I'm a mom of 2 girls. Yeah, that's about it for now. Facts.
I didn't know you're a mother of 2 young ladies. Very nice. How old are they?
They're little still. Well, young. 11 and 8. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Mr. Brian?
Okay. I am, how do I describe myself? Engineer, right? Entrepreneur, explorer, storyteller, husband. I have 3 kids, 2 older girls, 22 and 20. So they're not girls, they are young women, and also a very young son of 9 years old. So grew up Catholic, even though my friend here beside me says they were always praying for us Catholics. But anyway, grew up Catholic, very strong Catholic household. I mean, even my dad was in the seminary before he left to meet and marry my mom. So he had a strong religious background. One aunt's a nun, one uncle was a priest, so very strong religious upbringing. And what I found for me is that sex as a conversation and anything to do around sex and intimacy was always shut down. But I had a huge fascination with it. I was one of those kids that even though I found my dad's magazines, I did go to the library and study it and research it, and trying to find out more about it led me to this woman here, Beth, who coached me for a bit around my own sexuality and pleasure and understanding that. And now that's evolved into a little bit of a working relationship. So that's what has me here.
Excellent. I'm going to go, it's like ping pong, and go back to Beth now. very religious background raised and very professional career. When did you know it was time to make that change into this area of intimacy?
Well, they are combined, what you just said. So to up Brian, we're gonna have fun in this series. Like, seriously, I love this stuff. I actually went to Bible college, and so
oh my! You know what's funny? I thought I knew everything about Beth, but every time I speak with Beth, another layer. Like, I didn't know she had kids. Like, Bible college. Oh my! Like, keep on going, Beth. You're on the
roll. So I didn't know till about 4 years ago. I'm now 44. So I was around between 38 and 40 when I was really getting clear that what was happening in my world was really unsettled, that I needed to change it up. Now, my whole life has been really unsettled. I will get into that along the way a little bit. I won't overwhelm, but it was the combo of growing up religious and me being really well trained how to put others before self. That's there's a lot of beauty and a lot of challenges that I gained out of religion. That's why we want to talk about what does it even mean to be affected by religion? Because anyway, we'll come back to that. But you asked me a question. How did I know to do the switch?
Yeah, like, when did that magic moment
out of necessity for sanity, quite frankly, because my whole life, it's my life story why I coach. I grew up and everything was very shut down from very, very young. The conversation couldn't happen, and yet still there's physical pleasure going on. As a young child, you're touching yourself, but that was like that got kiboshed. But I still did, just hidden. So it started to be hidden. So my whole life started to be, all my pleasure and desires started to be hidden. And therefore, even my desires outside of any kind of desires, I couldn't even access my desire. What do I want to do when I grow up? So I remember just having no clue. And so one of my relatives happened to say, hey, you like accounting, you're good at math, do accounting. Okay. And so I did that. and I never... and then at one point, went to one of those early real estate seminars. Oh, okay, let me do that. So it just I evolved into whatever was in front of me, not really conscious of what it was that I desired. But there was this like under rumbling of being really frustrated and dissatisfied that erupted around 38 in between, and then getting clear on what the heck that was those 2 years when I started to really I didn't intentionally say, hey, I want a new career. That's not at all how it went. But there was this really looking more and more inside of myself. And so anyway, so then out of that came, a series of titles. I now land on pleasure coach because it is about pleasure, no shame. And I talk specifically about sexuality, even though I'm about pleasure in your whole life with no shame. I zoom in on the area of sexuality because it's such a missing conversation, especially with those of us affected by religion. And when you can deal with pleasure, no shame, and that hidden topic, you're covered for the rest, because it's like a domino effect. You clear it out in that most taboo place, you're clearing away the blocks of pleasure in general, right? So why not go big or go home?
Yes, I think that should be your what's it called? Your cut line. Go big or go home.
Or back to church, at least.
Oh wow! And I just want to say, anyone who's watching this live or on the replay, if you don't like to laugh, get out of here.
Yeah, we're talking about religion, but we will be laughing a whole lot.
Yeah. There you go. And again, by the way, Eileen says, hi, Beth, with big exclamation point.
Hi. I can't wait to meet her in person someday. Hi, Eileen.
And also, gentleman on Periscope, You for Sight, has joined, says much love, much respect, and he's shared it out to his 20 followers on Periscope. And we have Dre that's in the room. So Dre, if you want to jump in, just send me a note on the side and I will let you into the room. Right now it's locked, but I'll let you in the room if you want to come in. And that's with anyone who's watching live on the Get Vocal platform. It's also streaming on Periscope and also streaming on YouTube Live. So let's continue here. Let's get back to Mr. Brian.
All right.
Brian, I know that you had a challenging first marriage,
Right. Mm-hmm.
and I don't want to get you too deep into it, but can you give some high level about some of the challenges you faced in your first marriage and how it relates to this conversation?
I mean, my first marriage, as you and I have talked about, and I've shared before, I definitely classify that as a sexless marriage. I mean, it was one of those where it was getting to the point where it's anniversary and birthday sex, and that's it. I mean, you could even go
that's so churchy, actually, isn't
yeah.
it?
Well, both my daughters were born a month premature, but if you trace back to when they would have been conceived, it would have been our anniversary.
That's
so
awesome.
That was a challenge inside of my marriage. But what I found looking back, in that first marriage, looking into where all my relationships had gone, I found that the area around my own sexuality was always this big challenge. And, being a good engineer, I looked at the equation and said, who's the common denominator? Hands up, right? And so, it was getting to work on me. I mean, it was, as I mentioned before, alluded to before, this is an area and a topic that I've been fascinated about for a long time. But growing up in a family where you couldn't talk about this subject, where do you go? I mean, I remember I would have been about 12, 13 years old, and I found a book that my mom had bought for my sisters about, hidden puberty, all talking about sex and all those things. But for myself and my brother, who were older than our sisters, there was never that. There wasn't that discussion. So everything was like hidden. So as Beth mentioned earlier, it's hidden. So there was this hunger, this curiosity for what it is, what makes me tick, and what's not feeling shame about it, right? Not being, it's that dichotomy between, oh, this feels good, if you're touching yourself or masturbating, this feels good, and wanting to learn about sex, it felt right. But on the other hand, being literally told that there was something evil and wrong about it.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge. But it's that hunger, that thirst, that explorer side of me is what kept me going and saying, okay, I need to find out more. Mm-hmm.
This is for both of you. Looking back at the way you were raised, how did it affect your intimacy before you got to where you are now?
Okay, my mind went blank, which happens from time to time. which means something I want to share that I have to just get clear on. So I think, if you don't mind, before I answer that, if I could, this is something that this comes up in conversation all the time, because we're using the word affected by religion. How were you affected? All of that. I'd love to throw out just something that seems to help when people are listening or having this conversation. That we're all, majority of us are affected by religion, and there's different levels or layers or degrees. And the most heightened one is you've grown up in a religious household. So that was myself.
Yep.
And you as well. Just a different religion. Doesn't really matter. It can be any religion. We're from a version of religion.
Yep.
But that's the most intense version. Then there's the next, still intense, where you're in a community that's religious. So your individual household isn't, but maybe your grandparents were, or maybe the school you went to was a religious school. So you're in an environment still that's heavily religious. And then there's a third level where you're in a society. So neither your community nor your household immediately was involved with religion, but your society itself had a very big influence from religion. And that's generally all of us. And so all of us have been affected by religion to some degree and varying degrees. And then the variety of religions we grew up in had that impact as well. And I also find that what country we grew up in and what time period, all of that also has an effect on the religious take or interpretation towards sex and intimacy. So want to throw that out there kind of as a framework, because it's easier for me to refer to when I'm answering, because I could go off.
You go off? What? I've never seen that. I have never witnessed that. This is a new reckoning to me right now.
All right, so for all of those, let's say, inside joke, Dr. Vibe and Brian were witness to an onstage performance.
You better clarify that big time.
Oh yeah, see, people always make assumptions. Okay, my God.
Okay, well, you're talking about soulful individuals. So
yeah. Brian and I were speaking at the Men and Women's Masculinity Summit last Sunday, and we were speaking on the topic of realigning intimacy in the bedroom.
Right.
And we were sharing the stage, presumably.
Get closer.
and I actually had a reaction, and I since have learned I had a reaction of shame, ironically. And there was a couple of things that went on, and I just didn't know how to handle that in that moment. And so what happened is I kind of went like off on a tangent to find my way back until I could find and own that moment. But it was in my processing of this, it actually had to do with some shame, and I didn't know how to even speak of the shame in that moment. And I've studied and really processed a lot of shame. So yeah, that's the inside joke, because I went off on a tangent, which brilliant tangents, but definitely went off.
Just want to shout out Natalie Crew has joined on the personal side. So thank you, Natalie. And we have Mr. Wonderful on the Get Vocal platform. Thank you for stopping in. So that this is happening. So getting back to my question, I did remember it. So if you want me to give it to you again.
Please.
Okay. Looking at the way both of you were raised in your younger days, in your youth, in your childhood days, how did that affect your intimacy? Because you're not where you are now, where you were before. But how did that hinder or have an effect on you in your 20s, in your 30s? How did the way you were raised, affect both of you sexually in your 20s and your 30s?
So, okay, I'll go first on that one. 20s and 30s, to me, it goes back to teenage years. It was having sex before being married was, there was this feeling, okay, I'm enjoying it, it's pleasurable, but yet there's this part of you that's just saying, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And to the extent that you try to resolve it in terms of that first girlfriend that I ever had sex with, I felt, okay, I probably need to marry her. Even though, we were 16, 17 years old, thinking that, okay, I need to get married to this person. So I'm planning stuff about getting married because I was having the sex. Not that this is something I wasn't ready to get married. I still had to go off to university, all these other things I wanted to do. But because of that, that's where it had me going. And
no, I love it. I almost feel like our series could be by age, because I think it's very, I can even back it up a little bit more, because for me, and like you likely got at least some version of communication, whether it was verbal or nonverbal communication, that touching self, because I've got young kids, you're tactile, touching things to explore the world, right? So I was touching body, my mom saw me, that was shut down. I have no memory of even how that was communicated, but I knew it was wrong. And so for me, my effect started to be that I couldn't trust my bodily functions, actually. So I literally started to not even trust what was pleasurable in my body, period. And I started to get shyer and shyer about what I wanted. So I was, when I see my two daughters, I know we as parents, we see ourselves in our kids. My youngest is a version of me that never got let loose. She's very vibrant, very lots of energy and emotion and lots to express. And that kept getting shut down. And that's what I observed. And so when you speak of it in terms of intimacy, it became like a version of lacking of intimacy, because there was less truth of me. And intimacy, we're talking about sex, yes, but intimacy is intimacy with self and intimacy with any other person. And so it affected my intimacy with my friends, with anyone I was in contact, because I was starting to already put a facade up because I couldn't trust who I was. So I had to behave a certain way. So it happened that early for me.
And it has you even that shutting down and hiding away. Yeah, even things like sharing a hug with another person.
Oh my
gosh. You just,
I was terrified.
It's just things, you didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
And I always felt like I've been pulled in two directions where this feels natural, this feels good, but there's a part of my head that keeps saying, no, this is wrong, this is there. And yet I struggle from when you even look on the religious side of it, because, taking the religion and the logical parts of it, I'm saying, okay, all this is created by God, right? So it has to be good. Like my brain can't comprehend God's going to create bad, right? Mm-hmm. So, still, even though I'm not a practicing Catholic, I'm still have a very strong spiritual side of me, very, very deep belief in God. But to me, this is all created by him. And yet I just couldn't rationalize in my mind between what, as at a young age, where my mom found, she didn't catch me masturbating, but she knew I was and came to me and said, this is evil. Mm-hmm. Those were the words she used, right? This is taking down an evil path. So trying to reconcile that, and trying to reconcile going to a Catholic school, and it wasn't exactly Bible college, but right?
Yeah, we're not so formal and so stood.
Yeah. But there were things said there, like I clearly have memories of them saying masturbation is one of the most selfish acts you can do, and it's like, but I don't get it, right? So it has you, live this life throughout your relationships where you sort of peak up a little bit to experience the intimacy. And again, it doesn't have to be sexual, it can be any relationship. And then you shut back down again, and just peak up a little bit and shut back down again. So it was always this up and down with it. Mm-hmm.
Okay, good stuff. I just want to shout out some more people. Anyone who's on Periscope, for some reason, I can't respond to your comments. I see your comments, but I can't respond to them. So I would say either, if you want to respond want me to respond to comments, come on to the Get Vocal or go to my YouTube page. Both are streaming live, and both I can respond to. I guess I should say this, and then I'll let you guys drive the conversation, because they're here for you, not for me. How did you two meet? Because I think it's always an interesting conversation piece.
Oh, well, through your wife, Bonnie. So
no, through a friend of ours, Damien.
Oh, before that's true. I met you and Bonnie at the same time. That's
exact same time.
Right. So okay. Wow, we're so excited to share. So we had all been involved separately on different occasions. Myself, our mutual friend, and then you and Bonnie had at different times taken a Tantra course by an amazing woman, Lucy Becker, here in Toronto, puts on incredible, at this point, I think she's doing retreats, like a weekend long. She still does it. She's brilliant. And so it was funny because we all came together to meet and discuss, wow, like our lives changed out of this. What can we do together to continue this moving forward? Yeah. And so we sat around a table and talked about the business of what with it. It was just like a creative idea
and what can we do with it? Was there more to explore?
Building a community around it, something
build a business further out of it. Just where was it going?
Yeah, because it was so life altering for each of us in our own individual journeys. Yeah. And then we're like, okay, let's do something. And so then out of that was born various relationships, really. Like Bonnie and I started working together for a little bit. You and I then got chatting because of the religious similarity of the religious background and how that kind of shut things down. That's where we connect.
Yeah, like Beth and I say, we are almost a mirror of each other, right? There's a lot of similarities in both our lives, how we see things and how we do things. Mm-hmm. She's just a female version and I'm just a male version. Yeah. And so it's been, that's just evolved over the years, but it started from that Tantra course, which going through that, after I did that Tantra week and probably had one of the most spiritually profound moments of intimacy with my wife afterwards. I mean, I have something there that we won't go into this here, but called this orgasmic experience where it literally felt to me like I was looking at the face of God. And it was, I mean, it would be long to describe everything, but yeah, it was in this profound space. And for a period of about 24 hours, I was in this daze and haze where absolute peace, but like I knew everything. But in that moment of the sex, having sex, and in the moment of it, it was like this explosion in my mind, and I'm seeing the face of God. It was just profound. Yeah, and that was, that's where I need to find out more about this Tantra stuff, right?
I'm looking at Luke's comments. We have to comment. Luke's like, who's Bonnie?
Bonnie is my wife.
And I am not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Brian and Beth are not married folks. I know you may think they are, but they are. And I have met Brian's wife, so I can attest that they are not married.
No.
I met her at the summit, so
yeah.
I can't wait to get her on here because I know she would rock the house here too.
Exactly. Yeah.
She's remarkable.
But you still. So I know we've chatted a lot about you two, and we're doing part 1 of 3. I know there are probably some things that you wanted to set out with this part 1 of the 3 conversation. So what did you want to share with our audience on the first part of this series?
Well, we were wanting to set the stage for, actually, I love that you shared that story about after Tantra and having that Kundalini I like it. Luke says, hey, an enlightenment, moment of enlightenment. Absolutely. And we wanted to set the stage of like, what is religious shame? What does it even mean to be affected by religion? Because if you're the title of the series, we're converting religious shame to soulful intimacy. And so our intention is to like, okay, let's look at what this is. How has it affected us? And then, wow, what is soulful intimacy? Let's have some of that, right? And so tonight we wanted to like just check in with everyone. That's why I love that people are here. Like, we'd love to hear from you guys around what's your experience around religious shame or religion that has you shut down. You might not experience, I use the term shame. You might not experience it as shame. You might experience it as a shutdown or inhibition, or maybe just not somehow affected you in the area of sex and intimacy. So we just wanted to set a stage for that, Dr. Vibe. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to, I'm hoping that comments come in, but I'll certainly be a sounding board here or provide some content creation. In regards to the religious shame, Beth, how many of your clients have experienced that?
Oh, it's about 80% that are aware of that piece. Like that's an aware issue that they want to deal with. The other 20%, I believe it's an element, but it's not the focal point for them.
And with this 80%, how do they realize that, you know what, I got to change this. This is really oppressing me. Like I'm sure there's many Brians out there that say, you know what, I'm feeling suppressed. What makes them get to that level where they say, you know what, I got to break this barrier, for lack of a better terminology?
I love it. I'm going to answer that, and then I love if you share more because you spoke of it. It's this back and forth. This, I have a desire, or I have an awakening of something, or like often someone will be like, there's a pleasure they're experiencing, but then they're quickly shut down by the shame of it. So if you're having that stop, or start, and, or you're keeping the desire, you're experiencing it, but it's very hidden. Right. Or you really can't feel anything, but there's like a bubbling up of frustration. Those are kind of the different degrees. So meaning if there's a numbing isn't quite the right word, but it's something like numbing, but like a frustration that's boiling. You may not know what it is. You aren't having a great sex life, but you may not relate the two. Oftentimes I find clients are frustrated in general in their life. They feel like it's lackluster. So that's kind of the first indicator that I noticed, but people generally aren't aware that that's related to actually religious shame. And then the second one is where there's a hidden desire playing out and there's a shame happening, but they may not register as shame, but it's in a hiddenness. Okay. Might be looking at websites that they don't want to be seen looking at. They might be gazing at people at the office that are attractive to them. They may be jerking off to thoughts that they wouldn't share with, don't even want to dwell on in their own minds. That's more of the hidden stage. And then there's actually having pleasure, but then all of a sudden you feel bad about it. You might actually be experiencing something. And I have to say I call it remnants of shame still in my world all the time. I bump up against it, or it like surprises me like on stage on Sunday. And it's more a mastery of how to actually in the moments recognize it. And so you talked really clearly about that. So
yeah, for me, it was, you're always feeling this, but this is good. This feels good. That tantric experience, was more transformational, enlightening, profound than anything I ever experienced in a church, right? So and I'm not downplaying people that get huge spiritual uplifting and enlightenment inside of a religious environment or a church environment. It's not to say that that's not valid, but it was this. For me personally, it was getting this outside of it, and how do you bring the two together, and what is suppressing you, what is shutting you down, and trying to understand that. So that for me was where it was okay, time to going further with this, and wanting to have this full, intimate, rich relationship with my wife. Right. I'm making sure that I did not want to go into a situation like my first marriage, which was 10 years long, where it was, and long is the word I use, right? It felt like you're just dragging through, and you go into this haze almost of nothing exists anymore. You're just going through the motions day in and day out. And for me, it was recognizing I'd stopped dreaming. I was always a big daydreamer. I'd walk around dreaming and creating stuff in my head and so on. And when that had disappeared, I knew something needed to be done.
This is good. Just on Periscope, you first sight saying is you break the barrier to save yourself from whatever it has been put inside of you mentally by someone else. That includes the church.
Oh, I like that. That's an interesting phrase, break the barrier. Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't catch your name, but I often refer to it as, I don't know if the word cellophane or saran wrap. Plastic wrap, you cover up your food with. If you do it right, there's, if you do it, quite anally, and you get like very perfect about that bowl, you might actually want to poke at the food and you don't realize it's there. But that cellophane, that saran wrap, actually, that's how I often feel my shame is. It's a barrier that I often don't recognize as even there. And because especially there's all kinds of barriers. And so religious shame is one of them, of a myriad of beliefs that we take on board. Right. But the thing about religious shame is that generally when we're brought up in it, when we're in that affectedness, when we're young, in our household or in our community, a lot of this is done pre-verbal. A lot of it is done non-direct, like in an indirect way. So there's a lot of beliefs that we've never really noticed. Often we don't always examine. And then even if they were obvious, even the obvious ones, we tended to not be trained how to critically think, those of us who were in religion, to really question those. That wasn't desirable for a lot of us growing up, for those wanting to protect our innocence and having us stay in the faith. They didn't really want us questioning it, not because they thought, it was out of love in most cases. So I don't want to diss religion here. I want to be really cautious about that because there's so much beauty. So when I say affected, one of the things we're going to talk about next, what we want to do next, if Dr. Vibe allows us to come back, is that we really look forward to talking about both aspects. What's
Right.
the stuff that had to shut down? But oh my goodness, there's so much beauty that came from our experience, our
Right.
effectiveness by religion, which again allows us to bring in a soulful level to intimacy. It doesn't stay surface when
Right.
we're intimate with self and with our partners.
But yeah, right now it's really just understanding that there is an effect, and it did have this impact,
Yeah.
whether it's putting in a barrier or
Mhm.
even just as you said it well just now, in terms of it's input into you, but you don't get to question it. You don't get to even it's not no interaction with it. It's just, it's there, it's shown at you, but how do you interact with it? And especially in today's society where we're so interacting with everything around us and questioning things, and we're not just going through the motions, hopefully for the most part. It's, how, when you had that religious background, everything was just fed to you. What do you do with it now? How do you pull those pieces out? How do you understand where the blocks are, where the barriers are, what's affecting you, what's the good sides of it, as we will be talking about, and what's the negative sides?
Yeah.
Both of you have children. How has your journey, do you, and what you've learned from your journey, have you, how could I say, taken lessons from your journey and want or had the opportunity to share them with your children at all?
That yes, absolutely. Like essential.
Yeah.
And also with a mind to like, okay, don't go overboard the other way.
Right.
Don't but I would say, just to be brief for once,
Oh my gosh.
I one of my side things I love to do as a volunteer basis is around doing talks with parents, because it's for my own interest, how to talk to our kids about sex. From a place of our own values, aligning it to our values, because I think that's what was intended. I think that was really intended to love us, keep us safe, impart really, really great, rich values to us. But what I want to have wanted to guard my kids is that I make sure I'm really clear and intentional of what I'm doing and why, and that I am having an intentional conversation around sex that begins from birth, quite frankly. But it's not about, hey, I'm going to tell you the ins and outs,
Right.
but that I'm aware that when there's consent conversations happening every time there's a hug, right? And so I'm really conscious of when and how and what kind of relationship I want my kids to have with their own bodies, with their relationships in the future. And so that's one thing I'm aware of. And I want them to question and not be what you were just saying. I want them to have the faith piece, the soulful piece, be owned by them. And so I impart they have grandparents around them who have the same faith I grew up in. And I don't restrict them from that. They go to church camp, but we have conversations about it. I am intentional that we get to have a dialogue. So those are the two things.
Yeah, I think that is the biggest thing. I mean, for me with adult daughters, it's a different conversation than I have with my son. And my daughters, I didn't know enough back then to have the same conversations as I'm having with my son now. And as Beth said, my son, he's going to a Catholic school. We live with my mother, who is, is very strongly religious. She goes to church every Sunday, and there's a lot of pressure for us to still go to church, but we don't go. So my son doesn't follow that. But I think the key piece is that open dialogue. It's not for me growing up, as I mentioned before, there was no discussion about it. So I think that's the biggest thing, is to have that conversation, and a very age appropriate conversation. I did with my daughters when they were 6 and 4, go through some basic birds and bees. And then I heard back from the teacher next day, because I was talking to the older daughter, and the younger daughter comes back. I was a little egg, no bigger than the head of a pin, right? So she's just spurting this stuff off with no understanding of it, because I was telling her older sister, who got a little bit more, but I didn't get into the mechanics of it, where, so it's very age appropriate conversation, very, very important. It's aligned with your own personal values. So you yourself, that's a whole other set of topics to get into, but that alignment with your own personal values comes first. You have to be grounded in it and know what it is, and then have that conversation. Have the conversation with your children. My son and I, we would go for these hour-long walks, and I just let him talk. But I look for little snippets on where it comes in. And now the conversation's gotten more into girls because he's got this girl that he's gotten a crush on. And so he sent a note to her saying he's going to get a crush, or his friend told her, and then she told him back. And so, but then I take it the next level further. Both Bonnie and I do. Again, Bonnie being my wife, for those who didn't hear earlier. Yeah,
I think we're going to have to do that throughout the 3 parts.
And then like have a running scroll. CNN.
Yeah, down to the bottom of the bottom third, make that just run a scroll. Yes.
Yeah. And a picture of Bonnie. She's not the biggest.
So Beth, when you're having these conversations with parents, does the aspect of religion ever come up?
Oh, 100%. I always talk about it because it's a lot of your listeners will be in religion. 100%. Like, and it's wonderful. I went to church on Sunday with my mom and dad. Well, my mom, because my dad wasn't feeling well, but we went, and there's nothing bad or wrong intrinsically about religion.
No.
Absolutely. That's not what we're trying to say here. So it's essential because when you have these conversations, what matters most to you is the starting place. Actually. And so religion has to come into that. And I literally have parents, we discuss what are your values? What are the values in all their different communities that they're existing around? Because that's all. And what are your kids' values? Because they actually are developing and understanding their own. And then there's 5 other stages we walk through and talk about with the parents, but we start immediately at values, which encompasses your religious values, your religious beliefs.
Yeah, and it very much is dependent on what religious background you grew up in. And, we were in a conversation a couple of weeks ago with those of us that grew up in a monotheistic, so one God religion versus something like Hinduism where there's multiple gods. And, so it has different effects on different people. Yeah. So it's definitely not this religion is bad, but a recognizing of what's the role, where does it play?
Yeah, and really the key word I love is aligning everything. So if it's your own sex life, aligning it with your true self, your true pleasure, the depth of you. If you're talking about your kids, aligning it with your family values, aligning it with what your vision is for your child. I always say this, we totally plan out our kids' career, their education, their financial, but we rarely think about what their relationship will look like. We might think as far as like dating, we might think as far as marriage, but we don't really, don't freak out, but we don't really think about their intimate life. But if we don't think about it, someone else is going to impart that into their life, or they just navigate their way around. So to me, I'd rather be really integral in weaving the soul conversation and the physical conversation, just along with, as we teach them, their mental cognitive capacity, like mind, body, soul, we're all parts. So we can't ignore one without being off kilter.
Yeah.
So
like with my son, when this crush he's got on the girl, the next question is, so what do you want to do about that? Where does that go? So it gets him thinking about it and talking about it, and not just falling into something or falling into, having sex too early before he's ready for it. Right. Or whoever he's having.
Or before you're ready.
That's a whole other story, right? But
oh my! Yeah. Beth, I think your next career is going to be stand-up comedian. You know that. You know that.
Yeah, maybe that's in 4 more years.
Okay. Just want to shout out to Bobby, who's jumped on the Get Vocal side. Also, U4Sight says, in regards to this topic about speaking intimacy with boys and girls, he says, if it's boys, give them the girl talk, how to respect women. If it's girls, let them know how special they are.
Go.
I was going to jump in on that because
please. I love it.
With a conversation I was having with my daughters, the feedback they were getting from people around them is men are just out for one thing. They're just out for sex. That's all there is to it. And it was a beautiful conversation I could have with one of my daughters, explaining to her, yes, that there may be aspects of that where you can encounter men with a higher sexual drive, but there's no man that I have ever encountered that that's all they're all about, right? So having that conversation with them, absolutely you want someone to respect you. Absolutely you want to have someone treat you well, but it goes both ways. You can't have this viewpoint of men that are just one particular way, that all they're looking for is sex, and you can't trust what they're doing. And the same conversation I have with my son in terms of, respecting the women. Because like when he told this girl she had a crush on him, or he had a crush on her, I said, you've got to respect whatever she says back to you, how you're feeling about it. You can't be forcing something on that person. And so it is definitely teaching them both sides.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, we could go on and on, but I just, as having daughters, my biggest thing I want to impart on them is not that guys are all about sex. I want them to have eyes wide open and be very safe. Don't get me wrong, but I want them to value themselves. So they need intimacy with themselves first and foremost, and then know the practical, safety. But I also want them to elevate who they see men as. Boys are young men, and if they see their dad as or the men in their lives, right, their dad, their grandfathers, as elevated men, then they can hold this nice great standard for boys to become elevated wonderful men and not look down upon them, and eyes wide open. There is a period of time where there's hormones raging, and not other parents are not as intentional around teaching their kids how to navigate this. So there's some wisdom.
And
to
other
teach
parents aren't intentional because I go back to the school system. I was looking at, they're talking about introducing new international languages into the school system. This should be something we talk about. And I'm thinking, it's great. We've got the math, we've got the speed. Now we're looking at languages, but we don't teach anywhere relationships,
communication between the sexes. Like, oh my gosh, or between girls conversations. Sorry, poor Dr. Vibe.
No. I want to put in some stuff here. You first cited saying pride and sense of self should be most important to teach a child about himself as they get older, and remember that they need your input. Hold on. They need your input, and advice should come first. Once they have that knowledge, then they immediately will see the problem way before it comes. I want to then cycle back here in regards to what you have said about religious shame. How does this religious shame affect our young people today? Now, if you want, we can go further, or we can parking lot that for our next conversation. But I want to tie that in, and how is religious shame in both your eyes as parents and in the general society affecting our young people?
Well, go. You have something right. I can hear him churning.
For me, where it comes in is not because we are not, that's myself and my wife Bonnie, are not actively going to church every week. Our son is not exposed to that side of it, but he's still going to a Catholic school. So he still has, nothing has evolved a lot in that. I shouldn't say that. That's not fair. There has been things evolved and so on. So the shame side is less, but still in our school systems, that whole bit about how to have the conversation is missing. But the shame comes in, I talk in my household, where every other Sunday, my mom will go to my son and she'll directly go, "Why weren't you in church?" She won't come to me and say, "Why didn't you take your son to church?" Right? But she's trying to impart this guilt on him about why didn't you go to church and so on. So that feeling of guilt, that's still there, I see, from the generation before. But since his mother and I aren't imparting that on him, I find a lot of that just washes off. So he's hopefully getting a better alignment with it as he goes through his own journey of faith and what that means for him. But it's not hopefully something that is just indoctrinated. This is it, and there's no room for conversation and discussion. So I think if you look at the youth today, they're very much engaged in conversations and different things. But again, I don't think there's a specific avenue for this kind of conversation. But
yeah, and Yeah.
Just Beth, before you start, I'm actually going to step away for about 20 seconds as I got to get a charger from my tablet, but continue on. I'll be back in about 30 seconds.
Okay, then I'll share this because I think when I've been talking to parents, I've been talking to, I'm just looking at the comments. Bobby's just said, "Hi, Dr. Vibe, great topic. My son is 12, totally relating. Awesome.
Awesome.
I think what's interesting, if you connect the religious, is there an effectiveness by religion to kids? So there's two aspects. I think that those kids who are still in families that are deeply involved in religion are having a similar disconnect from body and soul still. I think there's still a discomfort in church, in religion, in mosques, in different religions of having the conversation about sex, because the fear is if you talk about it, then it's going to happen sooner. And that's trying to be avoided because they're trying to preserve something. So I think if you're in religion, which is still a lot of people, a lot of listeners today. And then there's another conversation of a lot more people than when I grew up are not in religion. And so then you've got this strange situation going where in society, now we're talking, I don't know who all is here from outside of North America, but let's just speak for a moment on North America, because right now there's a lot of openness around sexuality and sex, but we're actually the kid. And so then kids aren't in churches. So there's like a missing, there's a missing going on here that is really like, I don't think our generation has addressed it. And well, I would say a generation right before us, because the young, like from my kids up, well, I had my kids late, but there's a segment there that kids are actually talking about sex, no problem, but they don't know how to do intimacy at a deep level.
Yeah,
so
the intimacy and the soulfulness.
Correct. So if we're talking about soulful intimacy, there wasn't really a training of, because they missed how to do soul, right? Because they're outside of religion. They weren't really trained up in soul. And there's a lot of, out there around sex, but their parents still may not have been comfortable talking about sex. So there's this kind of place where I talk to millennials, and there's this place where there's a lot of comfort around sex, but they don't know how to do intimacy and soulful relationship and sex well. And there's a missing and a lacking of that kind of soulful intimacy. Right. So that's how I'm seeing it in that. And then, Dr. Vi, we were just sharing kind of different contexts.
Yep. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, well, there's a comment here from Bobby saying, "Hey, hi, Dr. Vibe, great topic. My son is 12, totally relating."
Yeah, we saw that. Yeah.
And I just saw you Foresight saying, "You belong to yourself when you become your own self. You start to disconnect from teachings that were wrongly placed there by your parents, such as Santa Claus being a real person." Children, children, we believe it, but as adults, we know the truth.
Some.
Right.
I'm teasing. Most of us don't believe in Santa anymore.
So I think that's a good way to wind it down on our first conversation on Get Vocal. I'd like to say thanks to both of you for taking time and your patience with our technical challenges. Any final comments you'd like to make? And then what are we going to chat about next time?
Just that it's a really layered, very rich conversation. A half an hour, we're just touching on topics, and it was really great. I'm glad we're doing a 3-part series at least. So thank you for that. And just to really have a look and be just curious in your own life. Yeah. Yeah.
And knowing it, a big part, again, it's about that conversations, talking about it. I mean, great. We're having this forum here to be able to do that. And as you asked, what do we want to go into next? I mean, Beth said it well earlier. It's affected by religion doesn't all necessarily mean bad. So we want to bring in those aspects, what are the bad aspects that some of us are experiencing, and because we touched on a lot of that, but there's a lot of good things in there as well too. And as was saying, how today's society, the millennials are missing some of that part of it, not necessarily being connected to any real spiritual side of it. So looking forward to bringing that another aspect of it, and then eventually taking it to that full soulful intimacy journey.
Okay. So, Beth, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, right now, lovely Eileen is helping me with my websites. So they're down. So you can easily email me a question or a comment. I'd love your feedback. I love this dialogue. And my email, I don't know if we can put something up.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, it's Beth@BethOstrander.com. I'll put it in the comments, actually.
Yeah. actually, you can do it right there. So while Beth is doing that, I'd like to say thank you for everyone who took some time to watch this. Eileen has just given me a happy face sign on Periscope for you. I'd like to thank you for sight. Let's see. This Eileen, of course, at Eagle Stores. That's on Periscope. I'd like to thank Bobby and Dre for jumping in, Luke for jumping in. Bobby says he's going to jump in when we do our after show. So we look forward if you can stay over for a few moments. He'd like to jump in after the live set is done. And myself, if you want to touch base with me, probably the best way is to go to my website, the DRVIBESHOW. If you want to watch replays of my epic conversations on the live stream, best place to go is to go to my YouTube channel, where you'll catch about 470 replays of YouTube conversations. If you want to listen to replays of my audio epic conversations, again, go to my website. You can also go to Stitcher Radio, TuneIn Radio, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts. You can catch selected audio replays at thegoodmenproject.com, WJMS Radio out of New York City, and Mile High Radio out of Denver, Colorado, and Amazon Alexa too. I am a certified empowerment coach, president and CEO of Express Your Vibe Coaching and Communications. If you'd like a complimentary session, please go to my website, go to the top, click on Connect with Dr. Vibe, and you can leave me a message via email or send me an audio message right from my website. Or you can reach out to me on Twitter at DRVIBESHOW. I'm a brand ambassador for the only online magazine that showcases African Americans in food, wine, and travel. The name of the magazine is Cuisine Noir Magazine. Website address is cuisinenoirmag.com. If you're a business or entrepreneur and you'd like to get media promotion, I do run a service called Getting Media Coverage, where I help businesses and entrepreneurs get media promotion so they can elevate their business, product, or service. So that's it for this conversation. So the last 4 things I say during our conversations are: live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. And finally, block assumptions. And the final little phrase I like to use these days is aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, and aim wider. Wider, not wider, wider. Yeah, so it's a lot of mouthful. Oh, wow, people are jumping in, Patricia, but we'll catch them in the after show. So thanks, everyone, and just keep a watch on Get Vocal or my Twitter feed when we will be on again. God bless, peace, you well, and keep the faith. Good night, everybody.
Good night.